Trade Organization and with NAFTA, two of the biggest trade deals we've ever done. And he tried to change the terms of those deals to involve issues that were not pure security. Things like migration, things like labor standards, things like environmental standards. Try to shift the world into a more egalitarian direction. Then you get to George W. Bush, who instead of trying to push the global trade system forward, just put together a few mid-sized deals that for the most part were to reward specific allies. Jordan, Israel, Morocco, Singapore, Australia, Korea. Not insignificant deals, but nothing compared to what had come before. Then you had Barack Obama. The American interest in the entire industry vanished. And now we have Donald Trump, who is looking to peel back as many of them as possible. Whoever won the presidency back in 2016 was going to be the president who was going to rule over the end of the global order. With Hillary Clinton, it would have happened relatively slowly over 4 to 8 years. There would have been pamphlets and PowerPoints and timetables. It would be very, very, very organized. Under Donald Trump, it's happening over 4 to 8 tweets. But we're getting to the same place. Now, the time frame doesn't really matter to the United States, but it matters hugely to the rest of the world because everything about the global system is predicated on the concept of global order. The US makes shipping safe. The US prevents trade conflicts from ever rising up to the level of gunfire. Think of what happens to the energy market without that, or the agricultural market, or the manufacturer's market. Everything that makes almost every economy in the world work requires American security overwatch. There's one exception, and that's the United States. Because for the Americans, trade was always about security. So the United States is the least involved economy in the world. Right now, only about 7.5% of American GDP comes from merchandise exports, and about 45% of that's within NAFTA. So if the United States can figure out its own regional neighborhood, the rest of the global system doesn't matter. And the piece of the global system that the US has traditionally cared the most about has been energy. The shale revolution has eradicated that. Break-even price for oil production in America's shale fields is now under $40 a barrel. And at today's price of just under 70, every shale field in the United States is economically viable. So the United States, in the worst case scenario, is going to be fully energy independent by the end of 2020. Could happen a lot faster if geopolitical events nudge us in that direction. And that doesn't even count the 3 million barrels a day that we get from Canada that functionally make us oil independent last year. One of the things that Bretton Woods really changed about how we manufacture goods is it took security out of the equation. So before the Bretton Woods system kicked in, you didn't have long supply chains because at any stage of the process, you could have a war, even if you weren't the target of the war, even if you weren't a participant, and it could interrupt one stage of the process, and all of a sudden you don't have finished good. What Bretton Woods did is removed any concern for security. So we used to have all of our manufacturers done in kind of a single industrial conglomerate city. You would bring in raw materials, local infrastructure, local populations, local workforce would process that into intermediate and then finished goods in the same place. And then they would be exported throughout the country or throughout the world. Now we've taken those singular cities and broken up into dozens, hundreds, thousands of steps. The iPhone, for example, 1,200 different facilities in 50 different countries. You can do that in a globalized system when no one's shooting each other. But as soon as people start shooting at each other, all of a sudden you no longer have iPhones. Automotive is another great example of how that works. It's 30,000 pieces. And if you only get 29,999 pieces, you don't have a car. These multimodal supply chains run around the world. The only way that the United States has really participated in this huge dispersion of the supply chain system is when it comes to different price points for different steps of the process. So for example, if you're doing high-end design of microchips, you're going to want the best engineers in the world. That's going to get done in Silicon Hills in the Austin area or Silicon Valley in the San Jose area. There's a flat done. But if you're making the case for a computer that's really just molded plastic, you might do that in Vietnam. because the United States is the world's largest market, and because we're, how should we put this, somewhat finicky, and we are kind of addicted to next day delivery, anything that pulls those production pieces closer to home is generally perceived as better. And because the United States has a low-cost manufacturing location right on its southern border, it's perfect. So what NAFTA has done is given the United States kind of a mini global system here in North America, with the high-end stuff based on what it is being done in the United States, being done in Canada, and the mid-tech stuff and some of the lower stuff in Mexico and the Central American countries. So we get kind of a global system in miniature, but even that is only about 5% of our GDP. But if you take all other American trade put together, you're talking about roughly 5 to 7% of GDP, depending on who's doing the math. A lot of that is energy trade, where we export very high quality oil, and the rest of the world provides us with very low quality oil, which means that you can fudge that. You're now down talking to 3 to 5% of GDP. Most of that is going to be in the realm of manufactured goods. Look at what's happening with technology these days. Automation, robotics, algorithms, 3D printing. All of those technologies argue for having a more concentrated supply chain system with fewer steps as close to the end consumer as possible, which means all that's coming back to the United States anyway. So now we're talking about services, financial primarily. If you've got a global system that breaks down, people are going to be working overtime to try to get their money from unsafe locations to safe locations. The United States is already the #1 destination for capital flight. Even in the age of Trump, it's only going to pick up. So we'll probably have if everything was cut off tomorrow, we'd probably have a recession that would give us an adjustment of 3 to 5% of GDP for a few months. And then we'd move on. The Chinese economic system is based on integration with the global system. Originally importing capital, absolutely importing technology, having value added within the Chinese system at a relatively low cost point, building an industrial base that can achieve many of these global economies of scale locally, because you've got 1 billion people to work with, and then bringing in steps of the supply chain from Korea, Taiwan, Japan, the Southeast Asian states to fill out the rest of the whole, kind of China Inc., if you will. That is only possible if they have unlimited access to bring in raw materials and energy from beyond their continent, if the financial system lubricates international financial flows to make this entire web work possible, if they have access to a hard currency paying consumer base of mammoth size, and regional and global security alignments mean that none of the people in this entire network, from raw material producers to manufacturing supply chain steps to end consumers, is interrupted ever. That's an awfully specific and large list of requirements.